Good morning, fourth grade students. This is Jason Brown with Boone County 4-H coming to you with another science lesson. And this one is going to be one that I'm really looking forward to, and I think you'll really appreciate. It's simply called Our Amazing Planet. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at some creatures, and we're going to look at some plants, and we're going to look at some places on our planet that are simply amazing. And so we're going to dive in and start looking at these. Some of these you've probably seen before or heard before. Maybe some of these will be something new for you, and you'll be able to appreciate again just how amazing our world is. The first amazing thing we're going to look at is actually a location and a creature. It's Glowworm Cave in New Zealand. Now, the worm, interestingly enough, they are not a worm at all. They're actually, in fact, a larva. And they are a bioluminescent creature. And what they mean by bioluminescent is that it's a creature that emits light. Here's how it happens. Inside this larva, this glowworm, there's an enzyme called luciferase. When that luciferase, that enzyme, reacts to oxygen in the air, the chemical reaction is a glowing effect. Why do they need this light? Well, they've adapted themselves to be able to create this light so they can attract bugs. Cool thing about these larvae, these glowworms, is they're actually fishers. Now maybe you've went fishing with your dad or your grandpa or grandma or someone like that, and glowworms are fishers too. Here's what they do, and this is really amazing, is they will produce from their mouth part a silk string, and every few centimeters they will produce a droplet of sugar water to attach to the silk. And they'll produce a string that is a few inches long and then attach it to the silk webbing that surrounds the glowworm larva. So they've got this little cocoon of webbing around them. They'll lower this string with these sugar water droplets on it and then attach it to that sort of cocoon-like webbing they've got around them. Now, they'll do this several times. They'll have 5, maybe 6 strings, lines that they'll run down and dangle from their place. Maybe you've went fishing in a way where you were able to throw out 2 or 3 different fishing poles and then sit them, stabilize them in the ground, and then watch all 3 of them. And that's kind of what they do. And when a bug is caught on the sticky droplets, the glowworm will simply reel in the line and it has its meal, its food there. What's amazing about this is not only the glowworm themselves, but the fact that in New Zealand, this is a very popular tourist attraction. It actually has over 500,000 visitors come to the cave every year. And as you see from the pictures, it doesn't take much to understand why. You're in this dark enclosure and all you see is these bioluminescent creatures that are emitting these lights along with these little droplet strings. It's a very beautiful scene. And it's on the list because it is an amazing part of our planet. The next one up is what is commonly referred to as the rainbow eucalyptus tree. Now, this is a tree that has a very beautiful appearance to it. They're found primarily in the Philippines, in the rainforests where there's high humidity. They can actually grow to be about 250 feet tall in areas like the rainforest where they sort of have some room to grow. They can be found in the U.S. in places like California, Texas, Florida, and Hawaii. But what makes these trees amazing is they have on the outer part of the trunk a thin layer of bark, and as the tree grows, the thin layer of bark will actually peel off in these long strips, and underneath it will reveal a bright green layer. It's nice bright green layer when that paper thin bark peels off. Now over time, that exposed area where that thin bark peeled off, it begins to oxidize and causes the colors to change drastically. Over time, this oxidation will cause the tree to change to blues and oranges, purples, and maroons. The oldest layers that are exposed will actually be orange or maroon. But once the layer turns brown, that means it's ready for that section to shed once again that outer layer, and then it begins the process all over again, exposing a green underneath, and then it'll go through that process and cycle. And it does that in long strips or patchy areas throughout the tree, and so that's why you see this rainbow color. As far as primary uses, other than in America, a lot of people use them in their gardens as landscaping to bring a lot of color and beauty to their landscaping. These trees can be utilized for paper products, wood products, but mainly They just have this beautiful, beautiful color. One of my all-time favorite animals of the animal kingdom is actually the octopus. They're cephalopods, they're part of the mollusk family, and the reason I like them is that studies have shown they have a high level of intelligence, and they at times can be very mischievous and do things that I think are very interesting. Some of the technical things about octopus and cephalopods altogether is they have 3 hearts, and as you probably know or have learned before yourself, much of their nervous system is found in their tentacles. Most of their 5 million neurons are not in their brain. They do have a pretty highly advanced brain, but are found in their arms. Humans have 100 million neurons in their body. Each tentacle can act on their own, can think, can taste, can smell with their individual arms. So they can, in a sense, see and smell and do all those things we do with our brain with their tentacles. And that's really something that's very interesting. By being able to do so, oftentimes you'll see in videos of octopus acting to where their tentacles can either work together or they can work independently. They are, like I said, highly intelligent. They can recall information from the long past. They can analyze and respond when tested. Octopus can distinguish one human from another human. They have that capability. There have been videos that have shown that they can use tools to get things like a rock to smash open a clam or something like that. They decorate around their den. So it's been noted that around their little enclosure or opening there that they'll actually decorate like they're landscaping. They do like to play and they're very curious, and like I said, they're very mischievous. There have been videos of them juggling clams for fun. There's 2 or 3 videos that have been captured where a octopus for seemingly no reason will sucker punch a fish as it passes by just because they're playing. Deduce that that's probably what they're doing simply because they're not making any attempt to catch that fish and eat it. They just, one floats by and they just reach out and boom, they give it a quick punch. They'll actually even play catch with humans. There was one video I watched where there's a medicine bottle floating in the water and the octopus would use its ability to squirt water to push the bottle across, and the human would take his hand and push it back to him, and they did that for several minutes. To me, those kind of things are just really, really fascinating when you look at it. The thing you probably know the most about is probably things related to octopus's ability to squirt ink, and they can do that. And the ink is poisonous. It's even poisonous to the octopus itself. What the ink does is it will fill, like, say, a fish's lungs with that ink and die, and it will actually end up suffocating the fish or whatever the creature is that it's trying to defend itself against. The other thing you probably know a lot about as far as octopus and what they do is their ability to camouflage themselves so well. They can camouflage themselves up to 2,000 milliseconds as far as their quick change from one background color to a next. That's faster than the human eye can blink, even if you're trying to knowingly blink quickly. Check out this video and it'll expand a lot more.
Cephalopod camouflage is among the most dynamic in the animal kingdom and relies on a system of extremely sophisticated tissues. Chromatophores are organs that are speckled across the skin of the octopus, like freckles. They contain tiny pigment-filled sacs, like little balloons full of different colored dye, which can be black, red, or yellow. The pigment sacs are surrounded by radial muscles, which can stretch the sac to reveal the pigment's color. Just like balloons full of dye, when stretched, their pigment color appears bright and vibrant. Depending on which sets of sacs an octopus opens or closes, it can produce patterns such as bands, stripes, or spots, helping to turn itself into a rock, a coral, or a kelp in an instant. But if the octopus needs to produce colors outside of black, red, and yellow, it uses another layer of reflective structures in their skin called Erytiforse. They are stacks of very thin cells that lay beneath the chromatophores. They contain a protein called reflectin that bounces certain wavelengths of light back out. They are responsible for the metallic blues and greens that appear to shimmer on the skin of the octopus. Beneath that layer is yet another layer of reflective tissue called lucifores. These reflect ambient light, usually producing white hues. By combining reflection from the Erytiforse and lucifores with the correct patterning of the chromatophores, the octopus can create a very convincing copy of its surroundings. But the octopus has one more trick up its sleeve. allowing it to disappear in plain sight almost completely. Using a structure called papillae, it can change the texture of its skin, creating ridges and bumps that rise and fall. This helps the octopus match its surroundings even better.
Another thing to note here about octopus before we move on is their ability to fit into very small spaces. Just like you see in this jar, they can oftentimes squeeze themselves into very tight spaces as a means of movement, as a means of getting away if they're being attacked. They can move quickly to move themselves into really tight spots. Next up is Lake Retzba. It's found in northwest Africa and Senegal, and as you can tell, it's pink. Now, the color comes because of the Dunaliella salina algae and bacteria attracted to the salt content in the lake. It's known for its oxidant activity also because of its ability to create large amounts of carotenoids. Carotenoids, you find a great deal of those in carrots. Because of the carotenoids, that and the algae and bacteria produce this pink color. When the salt content in the water is higher, the water can look orange or even red. At a red color, the salt content in this lake is 40%, and that's really high. Now, during the rainy season, though, if the water is diluted enough, it'll just look naturally brown, like many of the ponds and lakes in our area. How does the salt form on the bottom of the lake? Well, the ground beneath the lake is high in mineral sodium chloride, and that sort of works its way to the surface. Then, along with that high sodium chloride content in the soil, the evaporation that takes place in the lake, the evaporation takes place, and then that sodium chloride that is in the water will crystallize and those particles will float down to the bottom. Harvesting of salt in this lake is a big part of their industry, and harvesters will go in and pull salt off the bottom, and then they'll transport it to the beaches there to let it dry out and then be able to bag it up and send it off. Now, a miner or a harvester that goes out into the lake, one of the things they have to do is they have to cover themselves in shea butter to protect themselves from the high salt content. Salt miners say if they even miss one spot, they can actually suffer burns on their skin from that salt. It's estimated about 1,000 people work the lake every year, and they harvest an estimated 60,000 tons a year of salt off the bottom.
Le sel de la grosse, comparé au sel marin, le sel de la grosse est 3 fois plus salé, 3 fois plus lourd.
Next up is Nika Crystal Cave. It's a cave found in Mexico, and it is 984 feet down below a mountain that's rich in silver, lead, and zinc mineral. In the year 2000, ore miners, who were looking to mine out those minerals, discovered a massive milky white crystal cave down below this mountain. Now, these gypsum crystals are as wide and as long as telephone poles, so they didn't just find a small section. They actually found these gypsum crystals that were the size of a telephone pole. If you're like me, when you think of crystals, you think of maybe like the smaller geodes that you might have in a collection or you bought at a museum. These are not that. These are huge. Well, how did they form? Well, mineral-rich water in the cavern over thousands of years consistently heated these mighty crystals and caused them to form. A mineral anhydrite in the water, it dissolves into gypsum crystals known as selenite, and it's estimated that it took about 500,000 years for these crystals to form in this cave. One crystal can weigh approximately 55 tons. Well, it's amazing to think about the size of those crystals, and clearly you can see that in the pictures. The cave has been drained for study, so that mineral water was drained out, and tours can be taken, but they're very limited because it's extremely dangerous to do so. Temperatures in the cave, because of the magma layer that's underneath this cave, can reach 138 degrees Fahrenheit with 100% humidity. In only a matter of minutes, a person can begin to experience symptoms of heat stroke when they go in. Now, some of the people who have gone in to study, they have protective suits with air tanks that help keep their body cool, but the time in the cave is still very brief, and you can die very quickly from that. At this point, I think the tours have stopped as far as people going in, and there is talk of refilling the cavern with that mineral-rich hot water so that the crystals can continue that forming process. But this is an amazing place on Earth. Again, amazing because when I think of crystals, I think about the small crystals. These are telephone pole-sized crystals, and it's just amazing to see that a place like this exists. Next up is something that's going to be terrifying for you, but fascinating for me, and that is tarantulas. I actually have a pet tarantula at home, and they are fascinating creatures. For you, they look big and hairy and scary, and the movies have portrayed it to look like they are something to fear. And, like any creature in nature, you have to be cautious. But most tarantulas are not very aggressive if you don't mess with them too much. You do need to be careful if you ever interact with one, but generally speaking, they're not as bad as the stories and the movies have made them out to be. Matter of fact, they have more to fear from you than you have to fear from them. And that's simply because being a bigger arachnid like they are, their exoskeleton is a little more fragile, and their heart is actually up under their abdomen, inside the very bottom there. A drop from 2 or 3 feet is on a hard surface can kill them pretty quickly. I could tell you all about tarantulas, but the one thing I want to point out here that I think is very interesting is the idea that tarantulas actually keep pets. Yeah, it's true. They keep pet frogs around to help them in their den. Now I say pet, but really it's more of just a mutual relationship between the frog and the tarantula, because what happens is the tarantula will protect the frog from being eaten from prey that would attack and kill the frog. At the same time, the frog will kill and eat ants, insects, and bugs that might come along and try to eat and kill the tarantula eggs. And so they kind of work together, but it's more fun to say that the tarantula actually keeps a pet and say it that way. There are videos out there that you can watch of frogs and tarantulas interacting, and it's so interesting to watch the frog live in the den, and the tarantula doesn't pay it any mind, and they kind of work together. Next up is Lake Baikal. It's in Siberia in Russia. This lake is very beautiful. It's the world's oldest and clearest water body, and some would suggest that this lake, being primarily untouched by outside influences, gives us a look at what lakes and water bodies were like thousands of years before human impact came along. It's 5,300 feet deep, the deepest lake in the world. It has a surface area, a water surface area of 12,248 square miles. It's so large it contains 20% of the Earth's lake and river water. And as far as length of the lake, it's 395 miles long. One map I was looking at showed that it would take 26 hours to drive completely around the lake. One of the things that makes this lake so beautiful is from January to May, the lake is thickly frozen. And as you can tell from the pictures there, because of the shifting of the ice formations and some things like that, it creates some very beautiful frozen effects as far as the ice. And with the lake being so clear as it is, people can walk out on the lake and look down through the ice, which is itself as clear, and see hundreds of feet down. As far as tours go, it's relatively easy to take a tour and be able to walk out on the lake during the time of the year that it is frozen. And there's some amazing pictures online that you can look at that are very similar to the ones I'm showing you here. Let's focus on ants. Now, you don't need me to tell you that ants are really interesting and they are extraordinary. Some of the things they do as colonies, it's fun to learn about ants. And for the sake of time, I'm not going to cover everything that makes them unique. I'm actually going to only cover one topic about ants that make them really interesting, because some types of ants are farmers. They're agriculturalists. They actually do things that cultivate certain byproducts, and that's what they feed on. Two types of things I want to talk about as far as their farming capability. One is that some ants will cultivate byproducts from fungi. If you look at pictures of ants harvesting leaves and bringing those in, like the picture you see here, they're not bringing those leaves in so that they can eat those leaves and chew those parts up themselves, they're going to feed those leaf parts to the fungi that they are actually farming. The leaf particles are chewed up by the ants and placed on the fungi, and the fungi will actually consume that leafy material. Now, the return from that, the fungi will actually excrete a nutrient called gonglydia. And gonglydia is the byproduct from the fungi that the ants eat, and it's a highly nutritious material that they thrive on. So from the point of view of being an agriculturalist, from raising fungi, ants, they do that. Very interesting. Number two thing that ants do is they oftentimes will have what we would call livestock. They keep aphids. Now, aphids are tiny insects that feed on plants. They eat the phloem. The phloem is the part of the plant that transports sugar throughout the plant. The aphids will actually land on a plant and they will suck or draw that phloem out of the plant while they're there. Aphids in turn will excrete what's called honeydew, a sugary byproduct that the ants love. The ants will actually keep them in herds on plants feeding all day. The ants will press the back of the aphids, and by pressing their backs, they'll actually excrete that honeydew out of their abdomen. And the ants will move them if the supply is low, much like a farmer will move the livestock to a better feeding ground. They protect the aphids, especially from ladybugs who love eating the aphids. All kinds of things they do that relate to farming and cultivating like activities. If you look at this video right here, you'll see a little more detail.
The aphids, almost acting zombie-like, will get to work sucking juice from the kale, filling their body with honeydew. This honeydew is then excreted by the aphid when the ant strokes the back of the aphid, to which the drop will appear. Quite frankly, this looks like it's coming out of the butt of the aphid. Nature is weird. After reviewing the footage closely, the ants will either drink the sap directly or collect it on their front appendages and later drink it off their arms. The honeydew aphids produce will become the primary source of food for the ants, with the odd whole aphid thrown in there as a meal to mix it up. It's possible the aphids are allowing this or are okay with being under the ants' spell, as the ants will fight ladybugs that try to eat the aphids. Ants will move them around to the best plants to provide the most amount of honeydew, and will move them to shelter when it rains, potentially into their own nests. This honeydew is liquid gold for the ants.
How amazing is that, to see how ants harvest and act just like farmers. Next up is Fly Geyser. It's in Nevada. It's actually on 3,800 acre land that's in northern Nevada. And it is what we refer to as a man-made geyser. And though we call it a geyser, Fly Geyser is technically not a geyser at all, because a geyser has sporadic eruptions. And Fly Geyser is actually a constant production of water from beneath the earth. How it formed is this way. In 1916, residents seeking to dig a well abandoned the attempt when the water that came forth was just too hot for their use. And so they abandoned it. They didn't dig any further and they weren't able to use the water. In 1964, a geothermal power company dug nearby to find water that would be hot enough for energy production. But the water that came forth wasn't hot enough for that energy production, so they abandoned that project. And even though this geothermal power company put a cap on the place where they drilled, that cap actually deteriorated and the water began to spew forth. And because of this continuous spewing of water, that's how we have Fly Geyser. The reason that we have the three sort of built up deposits that you can see there in the pictures is that calcium carbonate deposits come up with the steam and water, and over time deposits build up around, and of course 50 plus years later you have these three large mounds and many surrounding pools. The brilliant colors actually come from the thermophilitic algae and bacteria that thrive in the warm waters around there. As you see in the video, as it pans around there, you can tell that this is a very beautiful place. It's actually on private property, so visiting it is not the easiest thing to do, but there are people who've been able to visit, get up close to it. The water is actually pretty warm, but it's not so hot that you can't stand to be near it. Is what's commonly referred to as the dragon's blood tree. It is found primarily off the coast of Yemen on an island called Socotra. That's a very dry, rocky area. And you notice that on this tree it has a very large limb sort of section at the very top, and a lot of dense leaves grow out of the top of those limbs. That sort of creates an umbrella that shades the base and the roots of the tree. It takes centuries for this tree to grow to maturity, so most are thousands of years old if you see one as an adult tree. And the berries that they produce is often used as an antibiotic for the livestock to keep parasites and other illnesses down. What they're best known for, though, is the blood red resin for which it gets its name. And you'll see in the picture here, the one where you have the little cut and you see the droplets of resin coming out, almost like if you've ever accidentally cut yourself. You see these little droplets. But if you see this one that's been cut down, you can see very clearly that it is blood red. Maybe a bit disgusting to look at. But that resin is used for a lot of different functions. As an example, the red and that deep red color in that dye and that resin is used to dye wool. There are medical uses if the resin is used in small doses. There are some cultures that use the resin as incense for religious or ceremonial practices. And the red resin stain has recently been used to stain violins. So it's just a fascinating tree. There's no other tree like it in the world whose resin or sap from it is blood red like that is. And it makes it a very beautiful tree in the sense of its uniqueness. One of my favorites as far as natural beauty on this list that we're doing is the Grand Prismatic Springs. It's in Yellowstone National Park, which is in Wyoming. Its center there is 121 foot deep. It's 370 feet in diameter. And the center where the water is the bluest is 205 degrees. Nothing can live in the center because of the great heat that's in the water. Now on the edge, one of the reasons you have those bright colors on the edge is trillions of thermophilic bacteria living in the cooling waters there. So obviously, as it gets closer to the edge where the actual ground is away from the water in the center there, the cooler the water becomes, and these thermophilic bacteria love to live there. Now, thermo means heat, philitic means lover, and that's how they get that sort of distinction or name. These bacteria, they love the heat. They live off minerals and nutrients that are in the alkaline water that is coming up from those springs. And so those nutrients that bacteria really likes to feed on. Now, alkaline in the water refers to the water's level of acidity. Alkaline water has a very low acidity, but again, the colors that you're seeing there come from those bacteria, and as they feed and eat, and as they grow, they produce these brilliant colors. This is a very popular site to visit. 4 million people visit it each year. Check out this little video clip I've added in here that'll explain some of these things further.
This is the largest hot spring in the U.S. and the third largest in the world. Its blue core may be deadly, but the colorful cooler bands at its edges are evidence the Grand Prismatic is also home to plenty of life. Each band supports a unique bacteria or algae that creates a color of its own. When visitors on the boardwalk of the Grand Prismatic cross patterns that look like giant flames, they are stepping over descendants of some of the earliest forms of life on Earth. These microbes, called thermophiles, or heat lovers, thrive in extreme environments like the waters of Grand Prismatic Spring. There are literally billions of these tiny orange-colored microbes here. So many, they create dramatic flame-like patterns that look like a work of art that was painted by Mother Nature herself.
This one shows an up close of those thermophilic bacterias that you see there. This is a close-up view. When you look, it looks like it's nice and smooth, but when you zoom in, it actually is textured, and that's not sand or buildup or rock. That's layers of trillions and trillions of bacteria. Of course, if you want to go even further, go under the microscope, and this is what they look like completely up close as you can get in this picture. Well, that is our lesson on our amazing planet. Really, I hope you enjoyed the video. There's so much about our planet and our world around us that it really is amazing. And I hope that you all will take the time to discover more of those amazing things in the future. Just a quick couple of slides here. One is to give you information about 4-H programming. There's a link there on how to enroll in 4-H. Enrolling in 4-H is free. And then there's a link there for newsletters. Newsletters tell a lot about what we do and upcoming events related to 4-H. I will put these links in the bottom in the description of this video so you can click on those and open those up real quickly. Again, my name is Jason Brown with Boone County 4-H. If you'd like to talk to me or have questions about 4-H, just have your parents call me or email me at the information you see there in the slide. Be happy to discuss with you all the things we do at 4-H, all the fun that we have. We've got a lot of fun things happening coming up this summer with our summer projects, 4-H camp, things like that. Again, I hope you enjoyed the video and hope everybody's doing well and look forward to the potential of maybe seeing you sometime in the future.